Angela Rayner's employment rights bill has been labelled a crackdown on banter and a threat to free speech. The Equality and Human Rights Commission said new rules that require companies, like owners of pubs, to take all reasonable steps to prevent their employees from being harassed by third parties could lead to excessive limitations on debate. Among the critics is the Free Speech Union's founder, Toby Young, now a Lord, who uses maiden speech in the upper chamber to criticise it, saying the added pressure plus legal fees may be the final nails in the coffin for some pubs. Let's take a look.
And I wonder how many publicans will decide, in the face of all their other difficulties, that this new duty, the cost of complying with it and the additional risks it entails, will mean the game is no longer worth the candle. According to the Campaign for Real Ale, pubs are closing at the rate of 37 a week. And I hope your lordships will think...
I'm joined now by the recently ennobled director of the Free Speech Union, Toby Young. You're there on telly and now you're here.
Yes. Yeah. It was slightly nerve-wracking making my maiden speech. Of course, I've done a fair amount of public speaking, but never in Parliament before. It's recorded by Hansard. So if you make a mistake, that's then written down and recorded for posterity. So it is a little bit nerve-wracking. But having got it out the way, I hope next time I'll be
did great. And now
a bit more
you're
relaxed.
Part of the establishment.
Now I'm officially part of the establishment. Yeah, can't deny that.
So this was a sort of fortuitous week for you to make your maiden speech in that way, because of the EHRC coming forward in this manner and
yes.
steps to point out what a threat this could be to free speech.
Yeah, I thought the briefing by the Equality and Human Rights Commission about the impact, it was about the bill in general, but quite a lot of it was about the impact of Clause 20, the banter clause. And it was really quite critical. And it pointed out that trying to navigate the conflict between people's right to express their lawfully protected belief, the right of gender-critical feminists to stand up for sex-based women's rights, will conflict with the right of employees not to be harassed, trans employees who may find that kind of opinion harassing. So that's a really complicated and difficult juggling act. The Employment Tribunal hasn't yet resolved that. It's an evolving area of law. So to expect publicans to get their heads around it and make sure that they protect the freedom of expression rights, the Article 10 rights of customers to express their protected beliefs, as well as the rights of their employees not to be upset or offended by overheard conversations in virtue of their protected characteristics. That's going to be extraordinarily difficult. And the word I think the EHRC used was challenging. But for challenging, read expensive, which is why I said in my speech it could be the final nail in the coffin for thousands of pubs which are already struggling with things like the rise in national insurance contributions. In addition to Clause 20, this new employment rights bill makes it harder to employ people on flexible terms. It eliminates 0 hours contracts. So all of these things are creating a kind of perfect storm for the pub trade. And I wouldn't be surprised if this new clause accelerates the erasure of what is, an essential part of our history and heritage, the great old British pub.
So why do you think the government is so married to this particular clause? I mean, they must have heard the arguments by now against it.
Yes.
To still go through with it seems like self-harm, as well as harming places like pubs and free speech.
Extending employer liability for the harassment of their employees by third parties. At the moment, they're only liable for the harassment of their employees by other employees, which is why you have all these kind of diversity courses and codes of conduct and policies in workplaces up and down the country. But extending it in this way to include members of the public, customers, that was originally part of the Equality Act, but it was repealed in 2013 when it was heavily criticised by employers who said, how can we possibly be expected to police the conversations of members of the public? It's one thing to ask us to, police the conversations of our employees, to send them on training courses, to limit our liability by saying they have to comply with these workplace policies. But how can they do it when it comes to members of the public? So it was repealed. in 2013. But this government is bringing it back. There was an attempt in a private member's bill to bring it back a couple of years ago, a bill called the Worker Protection Bill. But there was a rebellion in the House of Lords, and this clause, third-party harassment, was stripped out. But now it's come back again. It looks like there's a determined cabal, I think, of woke activists in Whitehall who are just determined to get this through. I'm not even sure Angela Rayner is aware that it's in the bill. The government's efforts to defend it have been incredibly feeble. I don't think they realise just quite how devastating an impact this will have on the hospitality sector and other sectors. I mean, imagine if you're a sports fan, you're in a stadium, will you be able to say to a linesman who makes, in your view, a bad call, "Are you blind?" That might offend a partially sighted steward. A member of the club could take offence on the partially sighted steward's behalf and demand that you be banned from the stadium for that kind of outburst. So it doesn't just affect hospitality, it affects sports, it also affects higher education. I mean, one thing we've encountered at the Free Speech Union again and again is the kind of gold plating of the Equality Act. So activists say, you as an employer have a duty to protect your trans employees from being harassed by inviting visiting speakers like Helen Joyce and Kathleen Stock and Maya Forstater onto campus, because their presence on campus will constitute harassment of your employees, and you have a duty to protect your employees from being harassed in this way. And we've often had to point out, no, your duty does not extend to protecting your employees from being harassed by third parties. Visiting speakers are third parties. You've misunderstood the Equality Act, possibly with the help of Stonewall. But now that wishful thinking about the Equality Act that woke activists have been trying to claim on its behalf for years will be true if this clause goes through.
Well, that ties us well into the next story, which is Sussex University of Sussex's fine, £585,000, I think. And they're contesting it because of what happened when Kathleen Stock worked for them and how they didn't take any steps to protect her right to be a teacher without harassment, and it seems like they're coming out fighting. The Vice Chancellor's sort of said, no, we're going to go up against this, even though it's been argued that actually they got a much lesser fine because it was the first time that they've actually been fined.
Yes, I think the Vice Chancellor of Sussex University is claiming that this fine is absurdly excessive. But in fact, I think it was cut in half when Sussex were initially told how much they were going to be fined. They submitted various appeals, and in the end, the fine was reduced by 50%. But I think this is a really important blow that's been struck for academic freedom and free speech on campus. I mean, it essentially sends a message to campuses that have got these absurdly censorious trans inclusion policies, which is what we're talking about here. So Kathleen Stock's right to pursue her research, to express her legally protected views about the importance of defending sex-based women's rights, they were curtailed by Sussex, and Sussex didn't do anything to protect her from being repeatedly harassed in the most unpleasant, threatening, horrible way by numerous activists, including activists on staff. And it isn't just Sussex that has this policy. It turns out this trans inclusion policy, which effectively limits what gender-critical feminists are allowed to say on campus, members of staff, employees of the university, it was copied from a template devised by an organisation called Advanced HE, where HE stands for higher education, and many other universities have copied this template too. Leeds, for instance. So it'll be interesting to see whether these other universities, who have exactly the same policies, which they've now learnt from the Office for Students, are probably unlawful, and they too could be facing fines if they don't do something about it. So it'll be interesting to see whether they dump these policies. I hope they do, because they really are having a chilling effect for people like Kathleen Stock in other universities up and down the country.
Yeah, well, it'll be interesting to see what other fines might be coming. Anyway, thank you so much for joining us, ladies and gentlemen.
Thanks, Josh.
Thank you.